Welcome back to Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. Russia, stop me if you heard this before, is continuing to strike Ukraine. This despite President Trump's recent demand that Russia agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine, at least within the next 50 days. A drone strike overnight left at least 8 people injured and firefighters battling blazes in several buildings. Russian strikes pounded 4 different Ukrainian cities overnight. I asked former Vice President Mike Pence earlier today about the situation in Ukraine and the president's apparent evolving position, not just on Vladimir Putin, but on weapons shipments to Ukraine. It appears the president has done a U-turn on Ukraine. Why do you think that happened?
Well, first off, I want to commend the president for releasing additional military resources and at least setting a deadline for strong, including secondary sanctions against Russia.
That's not where he was when he came in.
I mean,
in January.
I think President Trump is starting to realize that Vladimir Putin does not want peace. He wants Ukraine. 3 years ago, Putin launched a brutal and unprovoked invasion into Ukraine that has cost hundreds of thousands of lives, and he needs to be held to account. Now, I want to stipulate that I think President Biden did a terrible job explaining our interest to the American people. I mean, Major, I watched those speeches from my home in Indiana. He would talk in gauzy terms about democracy and freedom. And look, I don't know that Ukraine is any paragon of a democracy.
It has its issues.
But they've had their issues. And I confronted...
Corruption and otherwise.
Well, I confronted President Zelensky on those very issues in one-on-one meetings with him during our administration.
It's something bigger than that, is what you're saying.
Well, I think the reason why the United States is right to give Ukraine the resources they need to repel and defeat the Russian invasion is because I have no doubt that if Vladimir Putin overruns Ukraine, it's only a matter of time before he crosses a border where our men and women in uniform are going to have to fight him.
Have no choice. We'll have no choice.
Look, I've met Vladimir Putin. I've talked to him closer than I'm talking to you. I've told him things he didn't want to hear. Mm-hmm. I think this is a man who's made his ambitions about reclaiming the old Soviet sphere of influence in Eastern Europe no secret.
But to that point, Mr. Vice President, you've been clear-eyed about Vladimir Putin. Lots of people, not named Donald Trump, have been clear-eyed about Vladimir Putin. He's only coming to this realization now. What took so long?
Well, I think some of the isolationist voices around the president lost their footing when they opposed a U.S. military strike against Iran's nuclear facilities.
Tie those two things together for me.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to have voices like Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon saying that we should cut off all U.S. military support in Ukraine. It was another thing to hear those same voices saying that we shouldn't stand with Israel, that we shouldn't be prepared to use military force to prevent Iran from obtaining a usable nuclear weapon. I saw the president actually came out fairly harshly. So one
undermined the other, is what you're saying.
Look, I've said before, President Donald Trump is not an isolationist. I think it violates a bit of his nature. He's, by definition, he has a bias for leadership.
He's not an interventionist, though, and he's not a traditional Reagan-type Republican when it comes to the idea of multilateralism and free trade and open immigration. So he's something else.
Well, he's not an interventionist. I think we demonstrated in our years together that we didn't hesitate to use military force, but always as a last resort. Yeah. And that's why I never doubted, but I was still very proud that the president would dispatch those B-2s over Iran to take out those nuclear facilities. Because at the end of the day, he knows how to make a decision. He knows how to lead. But I have a sense that having heard the voices of those isolationists in and outside the administration, even speaking against standing with Israel and in clearly, their fight, that may have caused him to think again about Putin's ambitions and brutality, and the need for us to marshal the free world to stand with Ukraine.
And then clearly hearing from Putin over and over in telephone calls and then seeing what would happen after the phone calls would end and the gap between them.
Yeah.
Trump finally got it. Said, he is jerking me around.
Yeah,
the president said much worse than that, Mr. Vice President.
Yes,
I'm cleaning it up for you.
Yeah, no, he has. And I just, I'm encouraged by it. I'm encouraged by the president's willingness to stand so firmly with Israel.
Because the Senate is prepared to do a sanctions bill. All the president has to do is give him a green light.
They are, and I think it's about 85 co-sponsors.
Right.
And I want to be grateful for the president's move toward demonstrating that he knows America is the leader of the free world. And again, I will tell you that, you know, I had my critics. I had that presidential campaign. I ran in the primary in 2023. Might be the last time we saw each other. And I had my critics because I actually went and visited Ukraine during my presidential campaign. And I understood the concern people had. I mean, we had the worst crisis at our southern border in history, the worst inflation in 40 years. I mean, the argument that we couldn't worry about Ukraine anymore or
should worry
other
about
free
it less.
nations because we have issues here at home.
That's a compelling argument.
Yeah, it was. But I always held the view that anyone who thinks that we can't solve our problems at home and be the leader of the free world has got a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth. I always believe we can do both. We're doing both right now, and I'm encouraged by it. But I also want to say to you, you know, remember we were talking about our kids before the cameras started rolling. Yeah. My son's a major in the Marine Corps. Yeah. My son-in-law is a lieutenant in the Navy. People accused me of support for Ukraine will lead us to World War III. My response to them always was, well, you ought to study World War II a little bit more. Yeah. I mean, if you allow dictators to have their way, to run roughshod over lesser countries, that's what leads you to global conflict. Standing firm early on and setting parameters and saying to the likes of Putin, and any other authoritarian leader in the world, we're not going to let you redraw international lines by force. That's how we secure a peaceful and prosperous future.
Joining me now at the family table, Megan Scully covers Congress for Bloomberg News, and Daniella Diaz has the same beat for NOTUS. Remember, that's News of the U.S. Megan, your response to what you heard from the former vice president on Trump coming around to his point of view.
So I think that this has been probably the most stark change of course for the president in the first 6 months of his administration. When you think back to that February meeting in the Oval Office with Zelensky and how rattling that was for a lot of our alliances overseas, particularly European nations, concerned
felt
about
like pulling apart.
Absolutely, and we have seen this reversal. You know, largely from the phone call that you alluded to in your interview with the former vice president. Between Trump and Putin. And Trump is now on board with getting Patriot missiles to Ukraine, is talking about amping up artillery, drone interceptors. Right now, Ukraine is getting hit really hard, even with the U.S. envoy in country. And he's talking about this. But, you know, we should also note, however, that Trump is saying we're going to make these weapons, but we're not going to fund them. Right. Europe is on the hook for funding it.
To buy them and then flow through NATO.
Yes,
but it's still into the battle space, which is not where he was 6 months ago.
Could I just add, it was really interesting to hear former Vice President Mike Pence almost praise Donald Trump and his position on where he is on Ukraine. He didn't offer a lot of criticism. He even said, I'm hearing that he's not listening to the isolationists in his world anymore. It seems like he's really moving forward and trying to be a leader. It was really a stark contrast to what we heard from him on different issues recently.
So, Megan, at Bloomberg News, you pay very close attention to all sorts of things financial. And near the top of that list is the fate of the Fed Chairman Jerome Powell.
Yes, big news today in that regard. You know, you all wrote the story, and several other news organizations, including us, followed up that, you know, Trump in this meeting, this Oval Office meeting last night with hardliners in the House, floated the idea of firing Powell, which has been, of course, you know, sort of top of mind for the financial markets and others watching this closely. For months now, there's been so much tension between the president and Powell over interest rates in particular, and in the last few days, we have have seen, tension rise over renovations at the Fed that have gone over cost estimates, which the Fed says because of inflation.
Back to square one.
Then, however, Trump walked it back in the Oval, saying, it's unlikely, highly unlikely, I think he said, that he would fire Powell. Powell only has 8 months left on his term as chair. But still, we watched the financial markets go down after the news and then back up, when stability seemed to take hold again. Trump obviously is very mercurial and prone to changing his mind. So it remains to be seen what exactly happens. But, he reportedly actually showed these House lawmakers a letter saying, this is what I would give him to fire him. So we'll see what happens next.
Zohran Mamdani was on Capitol Hill today, and we have some sound, I believe, control room from Pramila Jayapal, who was once the chair of the House Progressive Caucus. She's still a very influential voice in that caucus. Let's listen.
Look, he's bringing anybody who can see the reality of the success of his candidacy and his campaign together. Anybody that's staying out at this point instead of endorsing this incredible dynamic leader is missing an opportunity.
Danielle, how did it go over?
It went over very well. I mean, he largely spoke to a group of progressives. Of course, there were some centrists there. Josh Gottheimer, interestingly, who has criticized Mamdani, was actually one of the people in this group. But it was really interesting after talking to these lawmakers. They wanted to hear his success story. They saw the campaign that he ran in New York, and instead of talking about issues, hot button issues, while he was on the campaign trail, he focused on issues that he knew Americans in New York City citizens, residents cared about. And that's what they wanted to hear. How did he do that? How did he reach voters? How did his message resonate? And tips for that. It really seemed that that was what this discussion was. And honestly, a lesson that the Democratic Party needs to have in the wake of all that loss that they had in the November 2024 election.
Daniella Diaz, Megan Scully, thank you so much for being here at the family table. Hope you come back.